Alright, so this is going to be the last section. It's going to cover ecology. In this, we're going to look at mostly the relationship between organisms. We're going to look at how energy flows between the different parts of the ecosystem. Also, we're going to look at how elements cycle. We're going to talk about primary succession and like secondary succession, how that occurs. We're going to address how populations grow, and then we're going to talk about how biomes are classified, and finally human impacts. Okay, so it covers a wide range of things. This is going to deal with a bigger, wider view of material. Alright, so first we're going to start with the levels of organization, and we talked about these in the very first video when we talked about the levels of organization. But you start with population, and an important thing is a population is the same species in the same area. Okay, then you have communities, which is several populations together. Then the ecosystem, this involves both the living and the non-living things. So quick terminology, make sure that you remember this. Biotic refers to living things, while non-living things are called abiotic. A means basically without, if you want to say that. But again, biotic is living, abiotic is not. Then a bunch of ecosystems come together to make the biome, and all the biomes together come to make the biosphere. So if you look at the picture on the right there, it kind of shows you the progression of the levels. Alright, and then a big focus in ecology is how is energy transferred. Okay, we have two forms of that. You have your food chains. You've learned about these since at least elementary school. It's a one-way relationship, how energy is transferred, what eats what, and it's just one relationship. Then you have food webs. These are a lot more complicated. They have multiple relationships. And so how these are related basically is that you have multiple food chains that link together to make a food web. Alright, and so in a food chain or a food web, we describe what we call the trophic levels. These are the levels that each thing occur at. Okay, so you have your producers. This is your bottom of the food chain or the food web, and they make their own food from the sun, typically. Okay, so this, like I said, this is the bottom. Then you have what we call the primary consumers. These are your herbivores. They eat the producers. Then you have secondary consumers, which are carnivores, which eat the primary consumers. And then finally you have the tertiary consumers, which either can be carnivores or omnivores that eat the secondary consumer. Okay, and these are going to be at the top of the food chain. And the image on the right kind of shows you an example of these different levels. Alright, now some other different ways that you can describe how organisms get their food is by dead stuff. Okay, and so there's two groups that deal with the dead stuff. You have the decomposers and the scavengers. In the notes, we called the scavengers, and this is important to make sure you understand that they are related. They called them detrivores. I think that's how it's spelled. Detrivores. Okay, which basically means they eat dead things. So decomposers, they will secrete enzymes to break down the nutrients, and then they'll absorb that nutrients. Okay, so things like that are going to be bacteria or your fungi. Your scavengers or your detrivores are going to actually just eat dead things. Okay, these are your vultures, your worms, your buzzards, anything like that that eats just dead animals that are just on the side of the road. Hyenas, another example of that. Alright, so similar to a food web and a food chain, another representation we can use to talk about energy is a pyramid. Okay, so there's two types of pyramids we'll talk about. They both basically look the same. You have energy pyramids, which show you how the energy decreases as you go up, and then biomass pyramids, which show you how the biomass decreases as you go up. So this is a weird idea, but biomass is going to be the mass of all living things in an area if they were dried. So like if we took all of the living organisms in a certain area, dried them out, and weighed them, that's the biomass. So both energy and biomass decrease as you go up, and so An important thing to also remember, this came up recently when we were talking about notes, is that the energy that's transferred between levels is 10%. So 10% of the energy from the previous level gets transferred to the next level. And that's shown here in this diagram, where you start with 1,000, go to 100, go to 10, and go to 1. Alright, so that's the energy transfer. One of the other things you talk about in ecology is what we call the cycles of matter, okay, or the biogeochemical cycle. That's the official name for it, but cycles of matter. And there are 5 elements that we focus on: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, this should say phosphorus, that's the one we talked about in class, and water, okay? And these are the different nutrients that you will see that cycle through basically the atmosphere, the what we call the hydrosphere, the water, and then the geosphere, which is the ground. Okay, and so there's 3 general steps that happen in each cycle. Is that one, the plant will absorb whatever element or compound you're looking at, either through the air or through the ground. Then an animal will eat that plant. And then the third step is that somehow the animal dies, it defecates, meaning it creates waste, it breathes, and these nutrients are put back into the soil or back into the air. Okay, and bacteria can also help with that process. So you don't have to know the particulars about each cycle, but understand which cycles we looked at, along with kind of the general steps in each one. Alright, so succession can happen in different ecosystems, or create different ecosystems, and there's 2 types of succession. So succession in general basically means growth or regrowth. So we can think of this as growth or regrowth. Alright, and so secondary or primary succession, okay, so that's the first type we're going to talk about, is going to be where you've never had growth before. So this is a new volcanic island forms. You have a glacier move back. You have a landslide or a mudslide is formed. There's nothing there that acts as foundation for things to grow in. Okay, so that's why the first things that come in are what we call lichens and mosses. Okay, so these things can grow in these harsh conditions, and they come in, they grow, they'll eventually die off, they create the soil to let other things come in. Where secondary succession, that's our other type of succession, is what happens after you've had some type of natural disaster. So a fire, a flood, tornado, things like that. So this is regrowth. And you already have a foundation, you already have soil there where things can grow. So the first things you'll typically see there are going to be weeds or grasses. So these small plants that then will lead to other things. So they both talk about how growth occurs, but it just depends on the situation. Alright, so leading into growth, you have population growth, and then you have 2 general categories of population growth. The first is exponential growth. Okay, so exponential growth occurs when there's a lot of resources. There's unlimited amount of resources. You can just keep growing and growing and growing. However, that's very unrealistic. Okay, and so what will eventually happen, which is shown here in the graph, is what we call logistic growth or logistical growth. Okay, this is where you have a certain amount of resources. There's a limited amount of resources, and so eventually your population basically plateaus. And so you'll grow until you reach that plateau, and a lot of times that plateau is what we call carrying capacity. And carrying capacity is basically the amount of organisms that can be supported in a certain area because of resources, because of a lot of other things. Alright, so we talked about several biomes when we were doing this, and this is a lot of information slide, but we're going to kind of hit the high points. There's 6 biomes we're going to talk about, and we're going to focus mostly on the climate and then talk about how the plants and animals relate to that. Okay, so tropical rainforest, this is the Amazon, things like that. It's very warm all year round, you get a lot of rain. Alright, so the plants, there's going to be layers of forest, so they're going to have some way to get the most sunlight, so they a lot of times have broad leaves. And then the animals there, because there's so many trees and stuff, they're going to have to get used to living in the trees. Alright, then you have the desert, which is where you have high temperatures and low precipitation. Very hot and very little rain. So for plants and animals, you're both going to have to, well, for plants mostly, you're going to have to be able to, keep water, Whereas with animals, you're gonna have to dig off with the heat. So a lot of the animals there are nocturnal because it is cooler in the night time. So they'll come only out at night. Then you have the grasslands. This is where, like the savanna or the prairie, those are examples of grasslands. They have a decent high temperature, moderate temperature, and a decent bit of rain. Okay, so you're going to see tall grasses, very few trees, and because you have a lot of tall grasses, you're going to see that you have a lot of grazing, a lot of herbivores, excuse me, and you have animals that will eat at different levels to help with competition. The temperate deciduous forest, this is our biome. This is where we live. You have a moderate temperature, you have a moderate precipitation. So you get these trees like your oaks, your hickories, things like that, that will lose their leaves and water, or excuse me, lose their leaves in winter to help conserve water. Because you do get some colder temperatures, some animals will hibernate, and things like that. Then you have the taiga, which will have long cold winters and short cool summers. This is where you'll get your evergreens. Because it gets a little bit colder, they get they have a waxy appearance to them to help keep in water. The animals are going to have thicker fur. They're going to have wider feet to be able to walk on the snow. And then the tundra is really kind of like a cold desert. There's not a lot of rain. It's very, very cold, so you're going to get very small plants that are going to grow low to the ground to keep warm. So they're also going to have to help prevent water loss. And again, the same animals will have some similar characteristics as the taiga, where you'll get a lot of like blubber and thick fur. They also will hibernate at times. They also have the broad feet to help walk on the snow. Alright, and then finally what we're going to finish with is human impact. So there are a couple of things here that I want to kind of point out. The first is sulfur dioxide. The cause of that, we're really going to look at the cause and the effect. The cause is burning fossil fuel. So either as coal in power plants or as in cars. And the effect of that is creating air pollution and also acid rain. Carbon dioxide is very similar. It's by burning fossil fuels. Also, deforestation has helped with this problem because trees help remove carbon dioxide. So if you lose trees, then you don't have the chance to remove carbon dioxide. This has led to increased greenhouse gases, which has helped lead to climate change. Nitrogen, we didn't talk too much about, so we're going to not worry about that one. Ozone depletion, we talked about, you have these things called CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons, that are found in, they used to be found in some spray cans. They're also found in like refrigerants, like in air conditioners and things like that. When those go into the atmosphere, they'll break up the ozone layer. So that creates a thinner ozone layer, which could increase the amount of UV radiation that comes onto Earth. And then finally, we have global warming. This is caused by an increase in greenhouse gases. And this caused the Earth to retain more heat than it normally would, which deals with a lot of different things, mostly with climate change. Alright, and so this has covered a range of topics. This is going to be the last bit of the review, and this is the end of the ecology section.